When you're setting up your SoapNote macros, you do have an option to set a default selection for an advanced macro. What this means is, out of the list of options and questions on part of your macro, you could set it up where it automatically selects a choice. And that way that automatically populates into your note, and you can change the answer if you need to. But this may be a way on certain parts of your SoapNote that you always answer the same question. You may want to set a default so that it automatically does that for you. This could help creating your SoapNote go even more quickly. This option is available on your macros if you are using custom macros at the system level or the location level. You do have to be using custom system or location macros to be able to edit your macro set. So if you're using a managed macro set, you would just need to switch over and copy it so that you can edit them. We do have other resources on that process. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to go through this setup at my system level. So I'm at my system level dashboard. I'm going to System Settings, Soap Macros. Here you can see I am using a custom macro set, so I can edit this set of macros. This is an example of a macro that I have set up where I'm asking the patient the changes in their symptoms, their pain scale, and their chief complaints. This may not be a good example to use for a default selection option, but I'm just going to go through the setup. You can only set up a default option if you have an advanced macro set up. So we do have other videos going over what each of these macros are, but you can set up a default option for majority of these macros. If I go on my symptoms changes, this is an advanced macro that I have set up. This is an example of a select macro where I have a list of options and I can only select one choice. Here I can set a default option. This will automatically select out of my options the one that I set as default. Since I have a select macro, meaning I can only select one, I can only set one default. The purpose of this, again, is to automatically select my default option and populate that in my SoapNote. Now, once the SoapNote is in the patient's file on your SoapNote screen, you can edit and change the option if it is outside of that standard behavior. Like say, for example, this is a macro where I'm selecting certain techniques, and I always use one certain technique for this one procedure. I could select a default option here. Once I set the default option, I want to hit save, and then you want to set the behavior. Now I do want to give you a heads up. The position of this question might move and be located right next to your default option, but currently it is on this screen. So I still want to go over the behavior, even though the location of this option may change or it may stay the same, but I want to go over the behavior. The default behaviors I have is set default and move to next macro. What this means is it will automatically select my default and move on to the next macro. I never see this question pop up on my screen because it's just going to set the default and move on. Or I could set the default but wait for confirmation, meaning this question will pop up on my SoapNote screen. It will pre-select the defaults that I have selected, and I can click go to next answer, or I could change the options if it is outside of what my normal default is. So this one just gives me a quick view on my SoapNote screen of what those defaults are, and I can move on or I can change them. So I'm going to show you the difference in those behaviors, but first I want to show you a different option with your defaults. Say I have a multi-select where I have a list of choices and I want to select multiple options. With multi-select, I can set multiple defaults. Let me hit save. I'm going to show you what this looks like if I have set default and move to next macro. Again, these two questions are not even going to pop up on my screen. It's just going to select my choices and move on to the next macro. So in practice, the only question that's going to pop up for me on this macro is the pain scale. I can select test mode and observe what it would look like, but I also want to show you in a patient's file on a SOAP note screen of what that behavior would look like. I am on my provider SOAP note screen. I can be on any SOAP note screen. The behaviors will be the same. I'm clicking on my macro. And again, my first question was, do I feel better, worse, the same? But I have a default option set, and the behavior is set default and skip to next macro. And my next question that can be asked is the pain scale. And you can see it set my default option on both my select and my multi-select. For example, if I have set a default and move to next option on all of these questions, if I click on this button, it's just going to automatically populate all of this in my note, and I can change an option if anything is different. This is a quick way to just auto-populate your desired options and change them in the patient's SOAP note if something is different. I want to go back and change this to set default but wait for confirmation so we can see what that behavior would look like. What that behavior will look like is those questions will pop up on my SOAP note screen, but I will see the options selected and I can confirm and move on. I do want to let you know that the set default but wait for confirmation will work on advanced macros that are essentially anything other than one option, the select button. Because if you have the select option, you're saying I can only have one choice, and if you already set that one choice as your default, then there's not anything to confirm. But it will work on any other advanced macros like multi-select, narrative, input, etc. Again, those are advanced macro options that I am describing. So in this behavior, what should happen is my default will select this one, but I don't see that option because this is a select macro. I will be shown this question because I have no default, so I need to make sure I select something. And since this is a multi-select, it will show me these three options automatically selected on my screen, and I can confirm or move on. So let's go see what that looks like in a SOAP note. Again, I'm going to go to one of my SOAP note screens. Click on the patient, click on the macro. So it's already going to select if I feel better, same or worse, select my pain scale, and here is where it has pre-selected my options for me. So this is the waiting for confirmation step. I can confirm these choices, or I could select something different. If the pre-selected, my default options are fine, I can just hit select answers. And then that populates everything in my note. So setting default options is just a way to help you in quickly creating your SOAP notes with options that you would select all the time. So instead of having to click on the button every time, it can automatically populate in your note. And yet, since it's advanced macro, in a blue box, you can go back and change it if an answer is different than your normal default option.